Next, from the state capitol, following the historic vote that approved citizens being able to carry a concealed weapon in Illinois, the only state in the nation to not have such a law, we hear from Todd Vandermyde, the NRA lobbyist who had worked on this bill for years. This runs about 5 minutes.
Todd Vandermyde, we just heard the House debate and pass the concealed carry bill, and as the lobbyist for the NRA here in Illinois, you were intricately involved, actually for years, trying to get this bill passed. Walk us through just briefly a little bit of the history. I mean, this was probably the third or fourth rendition of this legislation. What were some of the primary hang-ups and concessions that each side had to make before we got to this point?
Well, with the current legislation, I mean, it was an argument over fees, hours of training, prohibited places, and then whether or not there would be a single uniform standard, may issue versus shall issue, whether or not Chicago would have any extra say or Cook County would have any extra say. It was a complex issue.
Have you been talking to anyone within the governor's office as far as do we know where he stands on the bill that passed HB 183?
Well, I think it's interesting that the governor didn't oppose the bill in committee, and I think that over the last few days to a week that the governor has, been, I think, a little less harsh in his public comments about, the issue.
And generally speaking, no one gets everything they want in a bill, but the form that passed, what are your overall thoughts? Are you happy with what you had? Are you upset with some of the concessions that had to be made? How would you rate it in terms of the rights of gun owners?
Well, we're not happy about concessions like 16 hours of training overall. We're not happy about the fees. We're not happy about some of the prohibited places. But we made inroads on that. Where there was veterans are going to get credit for 8 hours of training. Hunter safety will be accepted as, for 8-hour credited training. You'll have, if you've taken other carry classes or other personal protection classes, you'll have credit for those. So with that, there's some things. The preemption was a pretty big win for us. The fact that Chicago's handgun registry, which Jane Byrne used to enact their handgun ban in 1982, goes away. That, there will be no local regulations about handguns by any municipality. That if you have a FOID card, you're going to be fined no matter where you go in the state when you're traveling with your firearm. Those are some pretty big wins. We've been fighting the preemption fight for, ever since they came down with the Chicago gun ban in Morton Grove. And so it's a long journey to put an end to that.
Am I correct in saying, I think we discussed this before, that if any establishment doesn't want someone to have a concealed carry, they can just put up a sign on the door that would say prohibiting the concealed carry within their establishment?
Correct. They can post it. Any public business, private business, whatever, they can post it, and that they don't want anybody carrying in their premises. They can do that.
What about the aspect that we had talked about in the past? If someone's going to a manufacturing plant, and can they carry the right to carry within their vehicle to leave the guns in their vehicle?
Yeah, we've got probably one of the strongest safe harbor provisions in the country over this. That you'll be able to leave your vehicle you'll be able to leave your handgun in your vehicle, so you won't be disarmed and disadvantaged going to and from work.
And then finally, if the governor decided not to sign this, there's the June 9th deadline. What would happen if that were the case?
Well, it's a little unknown what would happen, but if he wants to veto it, then the legislature would come back, and I would say, based on the numbers that passed, act upon his veto. If he just was going to let the clock run, I think he'd run into a problem to where that we would be facing the cliff that everybody has talked about. And I'm not so sure that the legislature is interested in that happening. But if that were to happen, it would be on him. I'm cautiously optimistic.
Last question then, because was the deadline that it had to become law by the 9th, or was the deadline that it had to be passed by the legislature? Does the governor have that June 9th as a deadline to sign it, or does he have additional time?
Well, I think the intent of the court ruling was that the legislature would pass and have something set in place to start the process. If he hasn't signed it, we don't have anything in place. And if we don't have anything in place, then I think there's a very good argument for the injunction to kick in, and that for those parts of the unlawful use of a weapon statute that pertain to carrying a firearm would be struck down. I just don't see that they want to do that. I don't think they want that risk.
All right, and actually one last thing, when does it become effective?
Immediately.
All right, Todd Vandermyde, thanks for joining us.
Take care.
The Illinois Channel's coverage of legislative issues is underwritten in part by AARP Illinois.